it wouldn't surprise me if many viewers of this video underestimate just how much power there is in the visual language of aspect ratios. For example, this aspect ratio tells me to keep scrolling, and this frame compels me to double tap. This aspect reminds me just how annoying it can be to have to wait 5 seconds before actually watching what you came here to see. And this will always mean movies to me. There are many ways to achieve this widescreen aspect, but I think the method we probably associate most with widescreen epics, whether we realize it or not, is often through the use of special anamorphic lenses. Very basically, these lenses squeeze more information onto your camera's sensor or film plane, and when corrected or de-squeezed, we get a wide and unique image, which even subconsciously often conveys Hollywood movie as well as Hollywood budgets. With that basic understanding of aspect ratios, visual language, and some technical information behind anamorphics, what if I told you this little sub $200 anamorphic lens meant for mobile devices is capable of taking some impressive, dare I say it, cinematic footage? I'm David, and this is the whole picture. So the footage you're seeing now was filmed with the Moondog Labs anamorphic adapter on a Google Pixel 2 using the wonderful Filmic Pro app. And I'd say most people would consider this to be a more interesting image, maybe even quote-unquote cinematic, especially considering that this was taken on a phone. I wanted to show this footage to kind of set a baseline for what the product was actually intended for, because I have some much more interesting and creative use cases for this little adapter. But first, a little bit of background info. There are quite a few of these phone anamorphic adapters out there, and it seems like they're of a similar optical design. That is to say, a focus-through design with the anamorphic set to infinity focus. So they should perform best when the taking lens is also set to infinity. This is somewhat reminiscent of the Panasonic LA7200 or similar HD camcorder 1.33 squeeze anamorphic adapters, just at a much smaller scale. Different manufacturers will add different coatings, which results in a different look and different anamorphic flares. But in many ways, more than the image itself, when it comes to these phone adapters, one of the most important things to consider when choosing one is its mounting solution. Many of them are made with proprietary or non-standard bayonet-style mounts, meaning you need a specific phone case or adapter to use them. Only a handful of these have standard threaded mounts, like this Moondog Labs 37mm rear threaded adapter. And this is the model that I would recommend to most people, because not only does it allow you to easily adapt it to a variety of mobile devices with a simple and inexpensive clamp like this, but because of the standard rear thread, you're able to mount it to a proper camera. And I think that's where things get really interesting, especially for, say, an indie production, where having one of these around can allow you to capture unique images and true anamorphic footage in situations that might be otherwise unreasonable for smaller budget productions. Because the Moondog Labs anamorphic adapter has a rear 37mm thread, it can be mounted to lenses that take 37mm filters, like the Olympus 17mm f2.8 lens. While a 37mm rear thread is somewhat uncommon, it's still fairly standard, so you can easily get the necessary step up or step down rings to use it on a variety of lenses you might already own. That being said, you do have to be fairly particular when it comes to lens and camera selection to get the best possible image out of this adapter. Using these adapters on full frame or with faster lenses can easily result in a blurry or smeared image that doesn't have a particular sharp in-focus area. At the same time, it can show heavy vignetting on wide-angle lenses or lenses with large front elements, especially when stopped down. While the occasional full-frame lens might work with this adapter, I would recommend most people use smaller sensor cameras, like Micro Four Thirds, on lenses with non-rotating fronts and smaller apertures to get the most usable image. This all might sound extremely limiting, and frankly, it is, but I think it plays to the adapter's strong suits while covering up many of its flaws. Many people might be disappointed with the fact that that setup would get you very little background blur. Even if you do focus in a bit closer to get some bokeh, it can get pretty funky, even to the point where it's distracting. But what I find extremely interesting about this adapter is that on something like the GH5 or GH6, you can actually use some fairly wide taking lenses, which is an area that many anamorphic adapters struggle at. Being made for mobile devices, which often feature a 28mm or equivalent as their main lens, this Moondog Labs anamorphic adapter clears similar angles of view, like that from the Panasonic 14mm f2.5, with only slight vignetting, but very much what I would consider an acceptable image. Unfortunately, because of the iris on the back of the adapter, wide-angle lenses, or lenses with larger front elements, like we often see on full-frame glass, can vignette pretty heavily. I'll try to leave a list of the lenses that I've tested with this kind of setup in the description, but I also wanted to mention that I managed to modify one of these little adapters and get a clear image on a lens as wide as 12mm on the GH5, but that's a video for a different day, so get subscribed to see that. And in the process of using this lens, I actually found that there are certain situations where I'd prefer to take the Moondog Labs lens over even some of the more expensive anamorphic lenses that I have access to, like the current one I'm using to film, the Lomo 50mm square front. For example, I found that having this tiny lens in your pocket really opens up a lot of possibilities when it comes to documentary style projects, especially ones where you need to have a smaller kit for, say, travel purposes, or when the theme of the project is potentially a bit dangerous and a larger camera kit will make you stand out or possibly get damaged in the process of filming. This adapter paired with either a phone or a wide-angle lens lets you really get in the middle of the action while still capturing a true anamorphic image. And beyond the possibility to use wide-angle lenses, what's great about the Moondog Labs lens for indie productions is that it renders a fairly neutral image, and the flares are for the most part subtle in natural environments and only get unruly when it comes to unusual artificial lighting. So I can see this being able to somewhat more easily blend in with other more proper anamorphic footage, at least to a certain extent and from my experience. Now you shouldn't expect this to blend in with higher quality anamorphics or every kind of scenario, but I found for smaller productions, the ability to use this tiny lens on an equally small camera or phone opens up a lot of doors. With something of this size, cost, and ability to go wide, you are much more likely to take a chance on a risky creative shot than with larger anamorphic rigs or cine lenses. Even something as simple as using the Moondog Labs lens on a stationary B-cam at an event or a concert to get a wider second angle works out well for a team of one. You can still get true anamorphic footage with the distortion and some flares to pair with a higher quality A-cam and lens, but you don't have to worry about leaving it unattended. That being said, the charm of the Moondog Lab starts to fall apart when comparing it to even some of the cheapest anamorphic cine lenses on the market, wide open and at close focus. But the performance of both lenses at infinity or deep focus really shows off how the Moondog Labs punches well above its weight class, and in the right situations, cut in sparingly, I think you'll find that the footage can integrate well, all things considered. But there is one more very unique and creative way you can use the Moondog Labs anamorphic adapter, and I haven't really heard this talked about much online, but I think it's one that can really make a difference when it comes to indie productions. Because the Moondog Labs 37mm adapter first screws on to a mount, and then alignment is done with a freely spinning anamorphic element, this makes the Moondog Labs lens, as well as similarly designed phone anamorphics, the world's most accessible mesmerizers. So I think now many viewers are asking, what's a mesmerizer? But I'm certain that everyone has seen this classic in-camera visual trick and understands the visual language behind it. Mesmerizers are often used to convey an altered state of mind for, say, a drunk or drugged character, but also have applications outside of that if you get a bit creative. But there are only so many of these made by so many manufacturers, and because you probably only use the effect a handful of times in your career, it doesn't make sense for most filmmakers to own this expensive equipment, and every rental house isn't necessarily going to carry one, so having this little adapter as another tool in your kit that you can reasonably own and easily take with you anywhere can really allow for some unique filming opportunities for your projects or clients. But that's not to say that just throwing this adapter onto any old phone or even a proper cinema camera is going to instantly give you more quote-unquote cinematic footage. And I'd say that would be true for any anamorphic lens. Although they produce a widescreen image we associate with famous movies, they don't inherently improve a poorly planned scene or a boring image, and when used incorrectly, they can even be more distracting than the same scene with a spherical lens, and break the immersion movies are so good at creating. To wrap things up, and to wrap things back around to visual language and a little bit of historical perspective, while a widescreen aspect can often be a visual shorthand for movies, anamorphic lenses also bring their own unique visual language. one that has grown and changed over time, as languages tend to do. What was once a means to an end to drive families away from their 4x3 TVs and into widescreen theater seats, Anamorphic's unique rendering, focus breathing, blooming, and flares have went from byproducts to achieving a widescreen look to more of a desired and sought-after effect. Early on in the history of anamorphics, due to technical handicaps or just the visual language of the day, they were implemented in a very different way than we see them used today. Early anamorphic movies often use deep focus, which tends to clean up the image and reduces the appearance of anamorphic's unique visual characteristics. It was also rare to see a rack focus shot in old movies, possibly because the heavy breathing was deemed distracting. And the variability of squeeze ratio intensity at different focus distance could leave actors looking distorted on the horizontal axis, and many refused to work on anamorphic pictures. In many ways, the visual language of early anamorphics was very similar to spherical lenses, and it wasn't until more modern times that we saw flares, oval bokeh, focus racks, and other anamorphic characteristics becoming popular. I think technology plays a big role in this. For example, monitors can allow us to use faster working apertures compared to the compromises that might have to be made when using optical viewfinders. Improvements in engineering might allow for focus breathing compensation or correction, as well as more focal lengths available to craft your story. So our visual language vocabulary starts to expand, but in that process, we tend to forget the old for the new. And I think that's where something like the Moondog Labs and similar anamorphic adapters can be overlooked too quickly. Because I think they fit much more into the older mindset and aesthetic of anamorphics, that is to say, a means to an end to achieve a widescreen image. In fact, they remind me quite a bit of probably the definition for a means to an end when it comes to widescreen images: rear anamorphic adapters. These would mostly mount to zooms and telephoto lenses, like a conventional teleconverter, but instead of squeezing the image like a traditional anamorphic would, they more or less stretch the image in one axis. And to many modern cinematographers, they may very well be considered the worst of both spherical and anamorphic. The image can become much softer than just what you would get with a spherical glass, while incurring a loss in light transmission, and at the end of the day, while you do get a widescreen image, you don't get the classic anamorphic flares, distortion, or oval bokeh. So in a similar way, these rear anamorphics and cell phone adapters don't really meet up with the modern parlance when it comes to anamorphic lenses, but if you take a page out of history and film with some of these time-tested expressions, you might just find the reason why these lenses caught on and continue to evolve till this day. Now, more than ever, filmmakers are going in all different directions, trying to find unique optics to match their voice and vision. To me, beyond the fact that these rear anamorphics can allow for optical zoom, or these cell phone adapters can be used in very unique situations because of their size, both of these options distort what general audiences would consider a conventional image to a much more unique image, and brings a different visual vocabulary with it to my work and helps me convey my message. And if that's just a little bit too out there for you, consider this. What used to take hundreds of thousands of dollars, a full crew, and extremely large and heavy camera equipment can now be somewhat replicated by a rig that fits in your pocket. I'm David, and this is The Whole Picture.